Hi, my name is Matt K. Parker, and I'm the author of A Radical Enterprise, Pioneering the Future of High Performance. It's a new book coming out next year in February, and it's being published by the same awesome publisher, IT Revolution, that puts this conference on every year. This talk is sort of a first peek at the contents of the book, so let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing you should know is that there's been some really great new research looking at different organizational archetypes and how they perform against each other, and some really compelling data coming out that the fastest growing and most competitive organizations in the world are organizations that look really different from most of the companies that we know. These are organizations that don't have any bosses or managers, they don't have any bureaucracies. They're kind of wild in certain ways. And so this book is really taking a peek behind the scenes of lots of these companies to figure out how they work and why they work. These organizations, just so you know, it's not just a handful, it's actually quite a lot. They now comprise about 8% of the world's corporations. They recently doubled in number over a 4-year period. Throughout this talk, I'm going to be referring to them as radically collaborative organizations. Now, there's lots of names for these types of organizations out there in industry and in the literature. I chose the name radically collaborative because I think it really drives to the heart of what it is like to work within these companies. So let me just go ahead and define what I mean by it. Radical collaboration is a way of working together that's very much grounded in intrinsic motivation. And it's formed by the commitments people freely make to each other. So it's a voluntary form of collaboration. It's never coerced. I think you'll begin to see what that means very shortly as I show you some of the pioneers of this way of working. And some of these are really massive corporations, so let's check them out. Okay, so you may or may not have heard of Haier. If you live in Europe or Asia, you probably know all about Haier because Haier is a massive appliance manufacturer, and they're also a smart home appliance manufacturer. However, if you live in the States, you may not have heard of them because their products aren't as prevalent here. However, you should know that Haier is actually the parent company of GE Appliances, which I'm sure you have heard of if you live in the States. Okay, so Haier is in fact the #1 appliance manufacturer in the world. They've ranked #1 in appliance retail sales for the last 11 years. They're 80,000 people strong. They have annual revenues of 38 billion, and they do all kinds of new and exciting sort of ventures in things like video gaming and cattle ranching and healthcare, and those already total about 2 billion in market cap. One thing I want you to go ahead and understand about Haier is that these 80,000 people are broken up into a really novel organizational structure that they call micro enterprises, and that their CEO refers to as a host of dragons without a leader. And I'll get back to that in a second. But these micro enterprises, they're 10 to 15 people each, mostly. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but they average around 10 to 15 people. They're really autonomous, they're self-managing. There's no boss of the micro enterprise. They set their own purpose, they determine their own product or service, they own their own profit and loss statement. And they're self-linking. All these thousands of micro enterprises in the organization are relating to each other, contracting with each other, or going outside the organization as they please, without the guidance or control of anyone. And Zhang Ruimin, the CEO of Haier, who's really, I think, in many ways responsible for pioneering this idea, he was very much inspired by the ancient Chinese philosophy text I Ching. And here's what he has to say. He says, in Chinese culture, the dragon is the mightiest animal. Today, each and every microenterprise is a kind of dragon, very capable and competent, but they don't have a leader. They start their own businesses on the market without the guidance of a leader. And that is the highest level of human governance. All right, let's take a look at another one of these odd corporations. So you may or may not have heard of Morningstar. Even if you haven't heard of them, I am almost positive you have used their products. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the processing of tomatoes. So taking tomatoes and turning them into diced tomatoes or tomato puree, etc. Morningstar is a tomato processor. In fact, they are the largest tomato processor in the world. They process a full 40% of America's tomatoes alone. They were only founded 30 years ago, but they quickly rose to dominate their industry. But how did they do it? Well, they have a truly novel corporate structure. There are 4,000 leaders and no bosses. Everyone there starts every single year as equals without titles. And what they do is they craft these things called colleague letters of understanding, where they say what they're going to do that year for who, and when they're going to do it by. It's really the promises they're making to each other about how they're going to take that year's tomato crops and turn it into the process results for all of their clients, like Heinz, ketchup, and et cetera. So it allows them to self-organize the day-to-day work, but these clues are also how they self-organize really the whole company, because it's not just processing tomatoes, it's how they go about purchasing equipment and doing payroll. All of that begins anew every year through this process. So it's a really novel, really fascinating approach, and certainly very counterintuitive, I think, in many ways. I think many of us would look at something like that and imagine, oh, it couldn't possibly work. It was founded by this guy named Chris Rufer, and one of his early colleagues, Doug Kirkpatrick, who went on to write a fabulous book called The No Limits Enterprise. Here's what he had to say in those early days. He said that early on, Rufer decided that Morningstar should have no levels of management. So just as they did in the outside world, the company's colleagues, who formerly would have been called employees, would manage themselves as they moved through negotiated commitments to their colleagues and to the enterprise as a whole. All right, pretty radical idea, but it definitely has legs, I think, as their history shows and their results prove. Okay, I'm sure you've got one of these hanging in your closet, a raincoat, right? But did you ever stop to think about the company that created the fabric that makes raincoats work? Maybe not, but what you should know is that company, W.L. Gore, is one of the largest radically collaborative companies in the world, and one of the longest lived ones. So they were founded in 1958, just a few nerds